Hello and welcome to the Bee Formless Flow Driven CEO podcast. And I'm super excited today to welcome to the show. I've never called it the show before, but there you go. Carol Shen. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here with you today, Bee.
Me too. And it's 6 p.m. Whereabouts again are you in the US, Carol?
I'm in Northern Virginia, so right outside of Washington, D.C., so East Coast time.
Yeah, how exciting. It's 8 a.m. here on Sunday and Saturday for you. So very exciting. So
Yeah.
let's get into it, Carol. I am is just as excited as you are. And what a great backstory you have and I guess experience. So founder of Start Culture Shift. So that's a boutique consultancy business helping, leaders and teams, and correct me if I'm wrong, embed culture into strategy to drive sustainable growth. You have more
That's
than
exactly
20,
right.
oh great. You have more than 25 years of experience in human capital, and you've had big leadership roles at Mercer, HR Consulting, and CEB, which is now Gartner. And you've worked globally with executives to align strategy, team goals, and culture. And I love your mission. Your mission is incredible because it's all about reframing workplace culture as a strategic lever, unlocking that greater clarity, connection, and collaboration inside high-performing organizations. So true to my heart and right up my alley. So have I got all
I feel
that
like we have
right?
a lot of, yeah, I feel like we have a lot of synergies
Yeah,
in the work that we
we
do.
do. We do. So tell us about what you've been up to and if there's anything more to add to what I've just shared with everyone about you.
Yeah, no, that was a great intro. So thank you so much for that. I think the maybe I'll add a few other areas of experience. What I've really appreciated some of my cross-functional experience. So I've also been on the board of a nonprofit in the past, interim executive director. Recently, I've had a bit more experience advising startups. So uh, have a relationship with Health Innovation Hub outside. They have a relationship with University of Toronto
Wow.
because I'm so excited and eager to equip leaders of companies at all phases of growth. And I feel like there's a particular opportunity when you're a startup and you're just getting started.
100%.
And if you have a roadmap to embed culture into strategy early on, it saves the company so many headaches that companies
Mm,
usually experience as they're trying to scale rapid growth. So a
yeah.
few other things I've been.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I noticed that with startups as well. That it's almost like you can't have a culture without a system, and you can't have a system without a culture, if that makes sense. And so I
Mhm.
think about system like a structure as well. All right, so let's get
Yeah.
into it. So, how do you define culture?
So culture is not a set of beliefs. It's what you do. And I define culture in that way because when we start to understand it's a collective set of behaviors at an organization, the good news is it opens up a path for us to be able to, if you can bring greater clarity of what's expected at a company, the behaviors, whether it's through competencies, through goals, those behaviors and actions shape your culture.
Mm,
And for me, that was a hugely transformational reframe once I started thinking about, wait a second, if culture isn't this amorphous thing that's kind of hard to define, hard to describe, if it's embedded in our actions, we do know how to clarify expectations and behaviors. We know how to hold people accountable to those actions. So that is a path towards shifting and improving work culture.
yeah,
I have an example if you'd like to hear
yeah,
it.
I love that. Yeah, tell us. Yes.
So one of my yes, so because sometimes I feel like it's one thing to hear this, is another thing to actually have an example of where it works. So I facilitated a strategy offsite. This is with the board and their team and updating their mission and vision and values, as well as their strategic plan. And what we did was we also added a culture statement as part of that. So made sure that was all aligned and we clarified the specific behaviors that guided how work gets done. I happen to have the culture statement in front of me, so I'm going to go ahead and read it.
Go for it.
When we when we are at our best, we embrace a growth mindset. We believe in striving for continuous improvement in ourselves and how we impact others. We're resourceful in finding solutions beyond the obvious. We embrace a collaborative environment, knowing it takes all of us, our team, our board, our partners, our investors, our residents, and the communities we serve to deliver on our commitments. We are dedicated to achieving excellence while fostering a fun work environment. I share that example because that really encapsulates the culture that this organization
Yeah.
is striving for. And when you put it down on words on paper and everyone is aligned to that, and everyone in this particular case had a voice in providing their input, and we came to a collective agreement that that's what the culture should be, that is so powerful. And once you have that North Star clarity in the culture, then the rest will follow.
Yeah, I love that. And I think because, the word culture is there's such a almost like a stigma around culture. Like for me, it's
Mm-hmm.
always been, what do you do with that? Like, what do you do with that word? Like, you can't, a lot of people say we've got a great culture, but what does that actually mean? And so
Right.
I love hearing you talking about, I see it as like it's values in action, it's an energy, attitude, and behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? And so I love
Mm-hmm.
the way
Yeah.
you just explain that also, because that actually is what actually drives that growth in the business commercially also, not just like driving the
Yeah.
growth of the people's mindsets, etc. It's
Right.
I think that a lot of businesses get it wrong in terms of they push profit, 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 and they
Mm-hmm.
say they've got a culture, but they haven't connected the two together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
And the research shows that, right? Because you and I, and any leader in any organization, common sense. We know that culture matters. No
mm,
one's going to say, oh, culture doesn't matter. The research has been there for a while. There's an improvement of profits, revenues. They say generally at least 20% with
yeah,
cultures that are positive cultures. In the same, in the negative direction, right? A toxic culture, you have much lower productivity, lower employee engagement. So there isn't, I don't think that part is controversial anymore. So that's the good news. The bad news is if you look at the last 2 decades of research, there hasn't been a huge improvement in how people report on their culture.
no,
So there's a little bit of a disconnect and a gap between we get that culture is important. It's the how that's been missing. And that's a
yeah,
big reason why I started Start Culture Shift, because I believe that there is an efficient and effective way to help leaders embed culture into your strategy. And once that's done, then you will see the culture shift that you're looking to do.
yeah, right. And so culture shift, talk to me. So that led you to start culture shift. Was it also
Mm-hmm.
this passion in terms of having your own business as well? Like what, so there was that component to what made you start culture shift. Was there anything else
Yep.
that what drove you to start it?
Definitely. So I have a background in industrial organizational psychology. So from the time I was at Berkeley in college, like I've always been very interested in the psychology behind work environments and how do you create environments where you see accelerated development, people thrive, along what you're trying to do, right? Is to bring purpose and soul to work. And all
Yeah.
those things have been very important to me. Um, and across my, 2.5 decades of work, working with clients, working with teams, leading teams, observations, there's so much good work being done, but one thing that seems to be missing is a systematic or a best practices playbook
Mm,
for companies to really shift culture, or
mm,
at least to, in business school, are leaders equipped to, hey, if you do a startup, how do you make sure your culture is the way it is? I don't really see that in the curriculums. And then once again, in
no.
organizations, by the time a company scales its growth to medium or large size organization, culture gets lost
Yeah.
and it's not something that people really know how to address and fix. And so I was just always thinking about, gosh, how do we enable leaders to do this more effectively? How do we actually get from like, oh, in theory, it's important to actual see culture shift and culture improvement. I was in a bookstore in Honesdale, Pennsylvania with my husband. We were up there because my friend's husband had an art gallery showing. They invited us there. And so we did this lovely weekend in the bookstore. My husband handed this book to me called Clarity and Connection
Mm,
by Young Pueblo,
mm.
which for those who will be listening to this, if you haven't heard of Young Pueblo, highly, highly recommend his
Yeah,
books.
he's great.
And the book was called Clarity and Connection. And that reading that book, Clarity and Connection, changed my life because the light bulb went off in my head and I realized like some of the missing dots are in the workplace. We need more clarity,
Mm,
clarity of the behaviors that allow a company to shift and improve its work culture, and more connection.
mm.
Because the lack of connection is an obstacle. When we don't feel connected to each other, we don't feel connected to the mission, it's really hard to be engaged with your work. And so those are two very kind of high level concepts that I'm trying to ground in actual like tactical specific steps so that leaders can actually really shift their work
Yeah,
culture.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, clarity for me, I'm all about the subtractive psychology, right? Subtract, subtract, because we have
Mm,
this
yes.
tendency to always add. So whenever we have a problem to solve, it's like, let's add to it. But what if we just subtracted, which is what you're talking about in terms of this clarity piece? And then the connection, what I find is quite often is, and you would probably appreciate this also from your HR and organizational design background, is you quite often go into businesses and you've got these very different departments and they're almost like
Hmm.
disconnected. And so I see it like an
Yes.
ecosystem where it's disconnected. And so, how do we interconnect it? And how do we
Hmm.
interconnect it so it all kind of stitches together? And, culture sits
Yeah.
up here along with the business strategy. But the other part of this is that, yeah, how are we connecting as people? How are we connecting with each other? So, I love your focus on clarity and connection, and especially because we spend so much time at work and we have such a loneliness pandemic, there's a huge loneliness pandemic going on. So it's important for people to come to work with meaning and mattering. So talk to me about what does people-centered high-performing culture mean to you then?
So when I think of people-centered high performing culture, I think of a place where people are able to do their best work.
Mm,
And that drives business performance,
mm,
right? It's not the other way around. It's okay, what's the strategy to make sure our revenue and profits are the highest? It's
mm.
how do we get the most out of our people
Yeah,
in a way where they feel that their work matters, they have purpose, that they feel good about coming to work. Like you said, we spend so much of our time at work.
yeah,
And if you could imagine if we could get a movement going where we need to change the way we do work, right? Back to what you said, there's data out there that shows a third of the workforce is burnt out, so much employee loneliness, so much lost productivity because
um,
people aren't engaged. So a people-centered high-performing culture, I do believe that that culture is embedded in their strategy.
yeah, it has to be. I think that's the only way you get high-performing teams as well. Like that's that back to that
Yeah.
connection and clarity piece. If they don't
Yeah.
understand the vision, if they don't understand where the business is heading, the North Star, what the attitude and behavior of the business is, well, you can't expect teams to perform. You can't expect this high performing because that's where I see the disengaged because, well, what am
Yeah.
I connected to?
Right.
Um, and I think a lot of the time for me, what I've observed with, in businesses and even in the business I was in previously, is that, we can get the burnout and being busy just for the sake of busy can also
Hmm.
impact a team from high performing because there's just
Yeah.
exhaustion. Like you have an
Yeah.
exhausted culture, an
Right.
exhausted organization. So you're not bringing the best out of
Absolutely.
people when you're operating in that constant, spin or reactive mode is kind of what I call it.
Yep.
Do you-
Absolutely.
And you probably no doubt see that as well.
Absolutely, yes. Because if we keep going back to creating, the role of leaders in organizations to create environments where people do their best work, everything you just described doesn't lead to people's best work, right? Because if you're burnt out, you're exhausted, like we're out of the energy and the motivation
Yeah.
that's just so draining and that's very not productive, right? It's the
No,
opposite of productivity.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what about research and data? So what is that saying? What are you hearing at the moment about the importance of culture? You mentioned you went to a conference. Is there any great nuggets that came out of the conference that you've most recently been to? Like, what are the top bits of research and data you're hearing at the moment? It'd be interesting actually, even from the USA, I should say versus, but like, yeah, what's coming up? I mean, it's pretty global,
Yeah.
what's happening around the world.
So there, and I encourage anyone who's listening to this to look this up themselves because I think it's so important for people to be familiar with this research. Gallup does some great
Oh, I
research
know.
every year on
Yes.
the state of the workforce, right? So those stats aren't looking good. Lots more employee loneliness, higher levels of employee disengagement, um, mental health has decreased significantly. The research, though, that I have recently come across that's very enlightening and I wanted to highlight is came out from a father and son team, Charlie and Donald Sull. They're based out of MIT. And I heard this research on Brene Brown. I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown, so her podcast on Dare to Lead. And what they've done is they've been looking through qualitative data comments on what people say when they're going to leave an organization. They were trying to understand what was driving the great resignation. And to this day, it's not that um, there's still record numbers of people that are leaving their jobs.
Mm.
And they came up with what they call the toxic five. So,
Mm.
how do people describe their cultures? If they use these words, then that is very predictive that they will leave. And the toxic five are, I have this
And the
jotted down
toxic
so I don't
five.
forget them, but disrespectful, non-inclusive, unethical, cutthroat, and abusive,
Mm.
which breaks my heart if people are describing their culture in that way, right? But the sad thing is there are still plenty of people, and it's not that an entire organization might be experiencing that. They talked about pockets of toxicity too, which we know a lot of times is connected to poor leadership, right?
Yeah.
There's that has been an evergreen issue connecting culture and leadership. If you've got poor leadership and leadership is resulting in someone feeling disrespected, non included, that they aren't accepted for who they are, it's really hard to want to stay in that work environment.
Yeah.
And so I found that really powerful. And the insight that Brene Brown mentioned that was also really powerful is how this relates to people's happiness, right?
Yeah.
Because when people work in an environment like that, you don't go home and disassociate. If you feel like you were disrespected, it's very hard to leave that at work, right? If someone doesn't turn in something on time, you have a disagreement with a coworker, okay, those kind of regular annoyances, not a big deal. But if you at your core feel like you're not accepted for who you are, that you bring that home and that impacts your relationships with your spouse, with your kids, with your family, with your friends. And so this kind of brings full circle back to my mission of working with leaders to improve the workplace because I
Yeah.
think that that's a way that we can improve globally the world as a whole if work environments are better for people.
Yeah, 100%. And I also just think it's all about, sorry, I've got something in my eye. It's all about, I guess making people feel safe, like that whole like
Yes, the psychological safety. Yes.
yeah, I mean, I feel like psychological safety. Sometimes I'm like, oh gosh, that word it feels such like a big word. It's kind of like culture,
No.
in a way. Like, how
Yep.
do you make it tangible? How do you make it like more, mean something? But I think it is a lot about that because there is a lot of cutthroat out
Mhm.
there. There is a lot of pressure, and I know, like, I totally relate to when you take work home with you, like in terms of that, it's a stress that just builds and builds and builds, and it can become quite chronic, and then it actually affects your
Yeah.
health, and that's kind of where the mental health
Yes.
kicks in, and
Yeah.
people don't sleep very well. It's like, yeah, it's all the things in terms of just the impact it can have on not just yourself, but like you say, your family,
Yeah.
and so that's why it is so important. So, what do you see as the biggest obstacles when it comes to getting in the way of a healthy culture? Like, what are you seeing with the businesses you're working in, and what are you hearing?
Yeah. So what, and when I'm in the world of trying to simplify this, like you said, culture is such like a big, hairy, it feels very amorphous, right? And so the three primary obstacles that I've distilled it down to based on what I've seen, and this is what I work with clients on, is first is how people define culture,
Mm,
right? So with lack of clarity on that, that's a big obstacle. Second obstacle is who's responsible for it in your organization.
yeah,
A lot of times the assumption is it's got to be the CEO or head of HR or chief people officers. That's kind of I'll talk about why that's not the best assumption to make. And then just lack of knowledge on how you
yeah,
address it. So those are the three biggest obstacles. And back to kind of coming full circle, earlier when I talked about how we define it, if it's defined as clarifying the behaviors and actions expected at an organization, that is something organizations are absolutely equipped to do through values, through culture statement, through competencies, even goals. In terms of who's responsible for it, I encourage people to think about it a little differently, that it's not somebody else's job, right? So it's not just the executive leadership's team's job. Of course, ideally it comes from the top. We hear it all
mm,
the time. Culture needs to come from the top. Their actions need to be demonstrate louder than their words. So yes, but as individuals, our actions, like the only people we can control is ourselves, right? It starts from there. So we ourselves can demonstrate actions that convey a culture of kindness, a culture of
mm,
care, a culture where people matter. And if you manage a team, if you lead a team, your actions matter a ton too. That also creates culture shift. In terms of the how, I go back to making sure that culture is just embedded into your strategy. And that's how you build that people-centered, high-performing culture.
yeah. I love that. I love that. Just the embedding piece as well, because again, it's
Hmm.
just it all connects together.
Yeah.
It's like you can't
And I
have.
can, yeah. And if it's helpful, I can talk through the roadmap that I've created
Yeah, love
because
that. Yeah,
that
yeah,
actually gets
yeah, yeah. Talk us through
practical
that.
of how to
Yeah,
do that, right? So it's like, how do we do that? How do you embed culture in your strategy? And it goes back to that example I shared earlier. Step number one, clarify that, make sure that your mission, vision, values, your strategy, plus the culture statement are aligned. Like that's number one. Make sure that North Star of what is it like to work at that organization? Have that piece, get the buy-in, get the input from your teams, and make sure it's all aligned. And then most organizations, at least medium to large organizations, probably already have a system in place. Usually it's a set of competencies, and make sure that those competencies are aligned with the behaviors that you're mentioning in your culture statement. I have a few examples. I feel like it's helpful to, so
yeah,
for
absolutely.
example, one of my recent clients, I helped them update their competencies, and they wanted to shift their work culture. So here is just a few. I picked three that I feel like any organization can do this. That's the beauty of this. This is
Mm.
not something where you need a huge consulting company to come in and help you. If you have the resources, companies can already do this
And I don't,
themselves. So,
and I don't think it needs to be this
yeah,
complicated. Do you know what I mean? With the greatest respect, like
yes,
let's
yeah,
again, let's subtract. Let's not overcomplicate it. Like,
exactly.
yeah,
So here are three competencies. I'm going to read them out loud and also a quick description. So growth mindset and talent development, the demonstration of a growth mindset through personal continuous learning, seeks feedback and invests in personal growth, demonstrates self-awareness and desire for continuous learning. Another competency, belonging and inclusion, embracing an inclusive environment and recognizing different perspectives and diversity in thought are core to our success. And then a final example, team collaboration. In this one, there's parentheses, includes delivering feedback and conflict management. I feel that the feedback skill is hugely needed in the business world. I wish it were taught in schools because I think that would just help
yeah,
remove a huge obstacle when it comes to connection. But this competency is builds partnerships and works cooperatively with others to achieve shared goals, expresses gratitude and recognition generously.
Yeah, I love those.
And so when an organization takes the time to document that and then start to reinforce and hold each other accountable, I was going to say kind of the third, first step was North Star clarity and what culture looks like. Second is, okay, what are the behaviors? So I just read a few competencies. And third step is that reinforcement through mutual accountability. This is where the feedback skill is very important.
Yeah,
So it's not just about, right, the manager holding the team accountable. I can't all be on the manager's shoulders. It's exhausting. That's why so many people don't like their middle management roles, right? Because they feel pressure from up top and also below. But if you can spread that accountability by equipping your team to give each other feedback and hold each other accountable to these competencies,
yeah.
these behaviors I just mentioned, that makes it much easier for culture to
I'm not
shift.
agree more. And I call it like feedback loops, right? There's the immediate feedback loop and then
Yes.
it's kind of but I,
Mhm.
I actually have built on that in terms of feedback loops with positive intent. Like nothing's personal here. So
Yes,
clear as kind. I know you love
absolutely.
Brene Brown. She talks about that whole clear as kind, right? So for me, it's about
Yes,
being clear, but being kind about it. You don't need to be cutthroat and horrible in terms of
right.
you don't have to be an a-hole about it. You know what I mean? Like you can deliver it with
Exactly.
positive
It's
intent. Mm.
it, yeah, and it's positive intent and you normalize it.
Yeah.
Because how are we supposed to continuously grow without data points from our colleagues
Oh,
and others who experience that?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love all those what did you call them? They were not assessments,
Competencies? Oh,
competencies, that's right. Yeah.
yep.
Because from a flow science perspective, there's all these flow triggers. So there's individual flow triggers
Mm,
and team triggers and everything you're talking about in terms of those competencies. That's what, the flow principles are, and how do you embed them into businesses as well? Like for example,
mm.
the autonomy, the shared clear goal, the
Okay.
feedback loop. There's also this piece around familiarity, which is, again, what you're talking about in terms of how do you get to know each other beyond just work in a way that, kind of builds on your connection, builds on your relationship. So I think that it's all good and well to have a culture statement up on a wall or on a piece of
Yep.
paper, but exactly what you're talking about, how do we then bake it into the business? How do we bake it into the team so that
Hmm.
it is something that is active and is
Right.
shifting the culture
Right.
continuously? Because that's the thing, culture as businesses grow, and you would see this with startups as well, and even in businesses in general, they go through a cycle, right? And culture can
Yes.
is the thing that keeps everything going around. And so
Yep.
you have to continuously be working on it. And you know what I mean? And working in it
Yes.
and on it,
Yes.
like is how I feel
Yep.
about
Yep.
it.
And this is an absolute huge opportunity for companies to be better about is not just being intentional about your culture, but checking in on it and making sure that it is headed in the direction you want it because companies evolve, they grow,
Yeah,
they scale, and the work environment, gosh, I mean, the the current environment with AI, the change is just
no,
happening
it's
so
huge.
rapidly and there's uncertainty and anyway, so there's all these things where um it's part of taking care of your business is checking in on your culture and hey, have some behaviors develop that they're a little less productive. Okay, let's keep that in check. Okay, what can we do to update wording and competencies or make sure managers are checking in one-on-one with consistent questions about, hey, how do you feel your work experience is right now? Like, how
Yeah.
has it been for you this week? Has
Mm.
it been a good week, a tough week? Like, let's talk about what obstacles are there. And constantly just baking a check-in with your people and how they feel about the behaviors and actions of others. That's, I think, just so critical, and it's unfortunately not happening nearly as much as it
Oh,
should
I
be.
know. I know. It really surprises me, actually. It really does because you get the whole, we've done the pulse check-in and,
Mhm.
I've experienced those pulse check-ins myself, and they go nowhere. Like you do a pulse check-in, you do
Yeah.
it all staff, it's a mandate, everyone has to do it. Then you get this list of all the actions you have to do. And it's like,
Mm,
then it's just like it's for me, it just feels so disconnected to the culture because
right.
in like what I've observed is quite often the pulse check-in isn't actually even attached to what the mission is or the statement of the culture is or whatever. It's just a bunch of questions
Right.
that are tick box and very surface and
Yeah.
transactional. Whereas again,
Yeah.
we need to be asking those questions. They're actually going to shift. Like I love your
Yes.
brand, your business culture shifts. Like how are
Mhm.
they
Yeah.
continuously shifting us forward? In terms
Yes.
of that synchronized energy, how do we get
Mhm.
everyone synchronized? So we have
Yeah.
we've both talked about this previously, happy and high performing teams. It's that
Yes.
simple, happy and high performing teams.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And who doesn't want to be happy at work, right? It
I
just
know.
I feel like like I said, we spend so much time at work, and there is a better way to work. There is a better way to lead. And I think you and I are both on that mission of helping organizations to get there.
Yeah, 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 fascinating. And so, one last question or two. What sort of, so talk to me a little bit about your leadership coaching as well, or you're working with leaders and teams and businesses
Mhm.
in terms of exactly what your offering is. Can you share that with,
Oh
the
yeah.
sorts of approach?
Okay. I primarily partner with organizations in two different ways. The first way is a lot of times I'm asked to come in to facilitate strategy sessions, leadership offsites, team offsites. Clients don't always come to me asking for help on culture, but usually it's they need clarity on strategy, or they need to engage their teams because there's some disengagement, or they want to, um, you know, have people walk away with the skill set of being able to connect with each other more effectively and things like that. And so I love doing it. I teach a ton. I've designed a lot of trainings,
I love.
super fun, super engaging. And that is one way in which I can, my kind of the stamp I leave with them are actions and behaviors and skill sets that will help them on a small scale improve work culture.
Yeah,
On a bigger scale, I also partner with organizations where I walk them through and advise them through the roadmap on how to
yeah.
embed culture into strategy.
Mm.
So, two types of engagements. Not every organization is willing to invest up front on the culture piece. So it's kind of bite-sized pieces. And what I'm finding is that usually after working with me, they see that kind of path forward to shifting work culture, and then they want to continue a relationship with me. And on the other side of it is my the roadmap is something that can be efficient and effective. It's not like this huge monstrous type of work. It's hey, it's part education and part here's a roadmap. Let's let's build that, and here you go. Your teams, your leaders, you now have the tools and the language to be able to shift work culture. Now I can come help do culture check-ins to kind of make sure that that continues on its path
Yeah, I love
in the
that.
way they're
I love
looking.
that. It's so actionable is what you're talking about here. Like it's just
Yes,
it
it's
doesn't,
actionable.
yeah,
Yes,
it's not a deck
it's
that
doable.
just put away into your PowerPoint
Right.
or whatever. It's a
Yeah.
really actionable deck. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, last question for you. What is your biggest hope for the future when it comes to culture shift?
Yeah. Wow, I love that question. I think my biggest hope is that more and more leaders and people out there feel that they can improve their work culture and that they see themselves playing a role in it versus it being somebody else's problem.
Mm,
I think if it requires education, it requires reframing, rethinking. That's why I'm out there kind of preaching this culture shift as and I personally believe that if we want to continue getting the most out of our people, we've got to change how we lead.
Oh, God.
And
Yeah.
by empowering people with a reframe definition of culture, with tools and how you can shift culture, language around growth mindset, continuous learning, greater self-awareness, that is the path to improving how we work
Yeah,
in
I
the
love
world
that. And just
globally.
to build on that, I think it's also for me about connecting the generations because we've got like seven generations in
Mm,
business these
yeah,
days. So everything
yeah,
you're talking about is so important because we've got different generations with different cultures, different beliefs. And so
yeah,
there's such a need for it, and it comes from the
yeah.
leader. So I love that what your hope for is, because it's so important. Thank you, Carol. It's been amazing. How can we find out more about you? Where, I mean, I'm going to put it in the show notes, but how do we
Oh,
find
yes.
where do we find you?
Yes. So at my company website at startcultureshift.com, all my information's there. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Carol Shen. So both of those are great resources.
Excellent. Well, Carol, I'm going to let you go and have a wonderful Saturday evening. But thank you. This has
Oh,
been
thank you.
amazing. And yeah, I've really enjoyed our catch up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bea. I love speaking with you, and I know we'll stay in touch. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.